Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Ryan Ride Mechanic channel. How the heck are you doing today? Thank you for coming back and watching another video. I do appreciate it. Today's video is going to be about mechanic stories.
Now get ready. Here we go.
I've done this once before. Everyone seemed to like it, so it took me a while. I had to jot down some stuff and try to remember things because so much happens, I honestly forget most of it. The little day-to-day stuff that probably would have been really funny, I honestly can't remember a lot of it. So much has happened over my career. But I wanted to go into those things that I was able to scrounge up and was able to remember for y'all. So I hope you have fun with this video. And let me know what you think. Let me know if you got some stories to add in on top of it. I'm sure it will spark a lot for many people. So let's get right into it. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button down there. It does help me out, and I do appreciate that as well. So I'll jump right into this with some operator stories. So I was taking care of an SLC, supervising over at the same time. And basically, I got a call out there that the ride just shut off. And I was like, why did the ride shut off? So I go out there, and they said, I don't know. Everything just turned off. Everything stopped. We don't know what happened. So I get my keys out, I put it in the panel, trying to turn it back on. Won't turn back on. So I hit the e-stop, reset it, try some basic stuff up there. Nothing there. I look at the light, and the air pressure light is dark. So I reach over and hit the panel test, lamp test, which makes all the lights on the panel illuminate, so you could check out for a burnt out bulb. And I hit the lamp test and look over there, and that light lights up. So I'm like, oh. Okay, so I reach over to the other side of the panel and turn the air compressor on. And after just about 30 seconds, 45 seconds, the air pressure light turns back on. So at that point, I was able to put the key in, turn it. Okay, ride turns back on, and then with operations around, I was able to reset it, get it running. Now, that was the start of that story, and basically, those operators actually continued to turn the air compressor off midway through the ride multiple times throughout the day. So what I ended up doing was I actually had to go downstairs to the control system, and I actually had to take the air compressor off button, and what I did is I ran it through a latching relay to where the ride still functioned the way it was supposed to. I didn't interrupt the ride logic at all. But what I did is I made sure that when the air compressor off button was pushed, it latched a relay in. And that was the only relay. It had nothing else to do with the ride or anything else. It was simply just a tattletale button. That's all it did. And the operator says, swear up and down, we're not doing it, we're not doing it, we're not doing it. I'm like, okay. So we put that latch system in there and then got the next call, came back in, that relay was latched. So I told operations, I'm like, you guys are pressing the buttons out there. You got to stop doing that. And they said, no, we're not doing it. So I gave them the benefit of the doubt, and I took the button out of the logic completely. Right where the two wires left to go up to the button, I simply just disconnected them in the control room and jumped them. So that button was always not enabled, essentially. You couldn't turn the air compressor off at that point in time. Talked with some people beforehand. Nobody saw a problem with not being able to turn the air compressor off. So it's like, yeah, okay. So we did that. And then, lo and behold, the ride ran perfectly fine for hours. No issues whatsoever. And I didn't tell the operator crew I was doing this, the crew that was up there anyway. I told their supervisors I was doing it, but not the crew. And so after a couple of hours of trouble-free operation, I again went in unbeknownst to anyone upstairs, and I took the jumper out and plugged the original wires back in where that button was up there, and then it turned off again. And they said, it's not us. And so I said, okay, I try to give people the benefit of the doubt. I don't want to just say, you're messing up and it's you and nothing else. So, okay, so I went up to the control panel where the actual switch is, and I jumpered the switch up there next. So basically what I was doing was I was proofing all the wire from the relay coil all the way through all the conduits and connections and everything all the way up to that button and all the way back down. So if the crew is being truthful and there was a short or a disconnect in the wiring, this would find it. Because I took the operator out of the equation and I just left the wiring in the equation. And then nothing happened again for another couple of hours. So then after that, I went out there and removed the jumper again, and then the ride shut off again. And I told the supervisors what was going on. They, midday, which was quite a pain in the butt for operations, they cycled the crew out of there, and they got a different crew up there. We did not hear any more trouble calls for the rest of that day. That one hurt operations because later on at night, when we had to decide who got the downtime for that particular piece of equipment, every single call that came out for that ride turning off like that had to go under operations because they were messing with the ride. Don't mess with the rides, just run it. I know it might seem boring at times, but just run the ride, please. Along those lines of operators messing with stuff, we had a Hawk made by Zamperillo. They make them in different sizes, but we had a Hawk, one of the only two, 48. The Hawk 48, these had electromechanical seats. So one of the isolation points is that once the seats were put into position, you had to go to the side of the arm because it had two arms that swung opposite directions of each other. And the operator had to turn this big rotational switch to the off position. So what that did is that energized the strands all throughout the seats that said that those seats were closed and locked. And then that also interrupted the bigger power needed to open the restraints, open the locks, and everything else. So when they turned that switch off, you couldn't physically open or close any restraints after that, but you could monitor the seats to make sure that they were in fact closed and locked while the ride was running. So what would happen is that the ride was very particular. It was a prototype style ride, so this is not uncommon for these things. But if you would turn those switches, there's only two on the ride, but we found out if you turned them in the wrong order, like the far switch first and then the near switch, the ride would fault out. But it wouldn't fault out when you turn the switch, like a lot of people would assume. Like as soon as you click the switch, the ride's like, nope, I don't got it. It would fault out really weird, and we never really understood why it did this. It's in fault logic, which is hard to unravel sometimes. So what would happen is that they would turn the switches out of sequence, and then they would hit the platform and tell the platform to go down because it was too close to the ride, so it had to lower first. And then once the platform got all the way down to the bottom and the DC drive enabled, as soon as that drive enabled, it would fault out with a lap bar fault. So it was like, we would get those all the time, but we had one operator out there that just continued to do it time and time and time and time again. So we knew they were doing it. I'm pretty sure operations knew that this person was doing it, but he swore up and down he was not doing it. Nope, it wasn't me. So the director at the time took his camera and went down there and stood way off to the side where it was hard to see, zoomed way in with his camera really close, and took pictures of the kid purposely doing it out of sequence. He would do it in sequence, and then before he did it out of sequence, he did the old look around and see who's actually watching. And then he would go up there and purposely go for that first arm and then walk right around to the other side and do that one first and then come back, do that one, give his little clear, push it down, the ride would fault. So that person wasn't seen again after that incident. I've probably said this one before, but it still irks me even to this day. We had a kid on our Skyrocket 2 that was pushing the secondary dispatch button and causing the train to overshoot when it came back home. So as it came back home, it would slow down, right to a stop, and then it was supposed to drift into the station, and then the platen brake raised up and held the magnets, and it stopped, and then the ride would release the restraints, and it would go on. Well, he found a quirk in the control system that when working the secondary operator, if he pushed and held that button as it was homing, as soon as it came to the home position, basically there was no timer in the logic to prevent that button from working. So the instant it got home, he was holding that button down, and the logic scanned, saw the button, and said, oh, we're trying to start another cycle. So it would lower the platen brake back down. It was a quirk in the logic. So it would come home, and then right when that Platten brake was basically instructed to come up, it wouldn't, because the logic would react faster than the mechanics could. So it would just come home and then just drift about 3 feet past that home position. And honestly, that ride was, I think that was the year the ride was new, and he caused, it was days of downtime on that, because we started getting frustrated and we started replacing valves and components and wiring and PLC card controllers and all sorts of other stuff, and we were trying to get ahead of that. Couldn't figure out what it was, and I finally caught it. And then I went back into the control room and played Let's Camp, and I waited back there watching the inputs on this dispatch button until one cycle, that train came home. You could hear it through the drive as it was slowing back down. And I'd look over at that input logic. I would see that button turn on right as the train came home. So, and then the train would overshoot. And I am like, SOB. I called my director up, and I'm like, I explained to him what was going on. I said, I bet you I could duplicate this with you here in person. And he said, how are you going to do that? I'm like, I'm going to make up a big show about it, and we're going to see if it's basically a bait and switch. Let's see if we could do it. He says, okay. So he comes down there, and I go, all right. I tell the operators, I say, go ahead, run a cycle on it. And I told them, I made this big production about it. I'm like, I swear, if it overshoots this time, we're going to send you guys home, because we don't know what's wrong with it, and the ride manufacturer is going to have to come out, and they're going to have to figure out what's wrong with this thing, because we don't know what's wrong with this thing. So they ran it, and I told my director first, because we both stood over there. We stood way back and to the side. So what we were doing is we were watching the Platten brake, because all of our attention was always focused on this Platten brake, because we thought it was malfunctioning. We thought something was going on with that, when in fact it was the operator. So we stood way back. We both were wearing sunglasses, and this is an indoor station. Really no need for it, but there's a lot of wind and stuff that comes back through there. So, and it's maintenance. It's not an unusual thing for us. So we were both wearing sunglasses, and we purposely tilted our head line of sight towards that Platten brake. We're looking down at the Platten brake just like this. But I told him, I said, all right, while we're watching it, I said, when it comes home, I want you to get down really close and really focus on that brake, and really focus, but behind your glasses, stare at that guy. Stare at his button. Stare at his dispatch button. Okay, so we did that. So we're standing there talking. They dispatch the ride, and we're like, all right. And then it's going out. It's doing it. Swings, and it goes up and over. And here it comes back around. It's like, okay, here we go. So here we come. Goes out. Goes up the front tower. Here it comes in reverse. So it comes back down, and we start doing our like this. And here it comes. And the guy nonchalantly had his thumb sitting there, and he just pushed that button in just a little bit right as the train passed by the home position. And we were like, that's it. We're done. Shut it down. You guys go home. And they're like, that's it? And it's like, yeah, that's it. You guys, we don't know. You guys go ahead and go on. Just out and about. It's like, okay. So I was done at that point in time. I left it up to my director. So my director of maintenance, went and talked to the director of operations. They had a little powwow. Pretty soon we had a new crew out there operating that ride. And pretty soon the other crew that was out there operating that ride, never saw them again. Don't know what happened to them, but they didn't show back up at the park. That one was really nasty because we had probably hundreds of thousands of dollars wrapped up in not only mechanical equipment purchased for that ride, but we had the manufacturer constantly working with it. We had the drive manufacturer that built the drive system working with it. We had the controls guy who designed the control system working with it. We had all these companies working on this thing. And and didn't know what was going on. So there was a lot of money changing hands trying to troubleshoot and get that thing back up and running. It was not good, very expensive. I believe the park actually went so far as to, I think they tried going after him. I don't think anything happened with it, but I think they actually tried going after the operator that was doing that for public endangerment, because they were creating a scenario to where that as soon as it overshot, people were essentially stuck on the ride. And I believe the mindset was, well, if they're stuck, they could panic, and then there was all sorts of other problems going on. But I don't think that got to stick. But that was such a nasty one. Again, that's probably a repeat story. I apologize for those of you who've been around a while and listened to that one, but that hurts right here. Oh my gosh. Oof. After work, sometimes my family would come, friends' family would come to the park, and they would visit. And what would happen is I was done being the mechanic or the supervisor, whichever way it was, and I would simply change out my normal clothes, my normal stuff, and I would head out into the park, and I would go enjoy the rest of the day with my family and my friends. And we would go out and just enjoy the park like regular people. So one time, I went on our impulse coaster, this guy, where I got this seat from. This is off our impulse coaster. So I went to our impulse coaster and I got on. Now, the way I sit right now, I am 60 pounds lighter than I used to be. So when I was working there, I had a really hard time fitting in the restraints of that ride. In fact, that day, since I knew I was going to be doing this, that morning before the ride opened, I actually went to that ride with the mechanic and test sat a bunch of seats to figure out what was my best chance of fitting on the ride. Because it was really the seatbelt had to buckle. And the older the seatbelt is, the more they stretch. And everything's adjusted a little differently. So some seats I would sit down and with a good force down on it. I mean, it was quite a So with a good force down on it, the operators could barely get the seatbelt buckled. Click. There was one or two seats on there where I could sit down. I could pull it down myself, and with a little nudge from myself, just kind of back at me, I was able to buckle my own seatbelt. And there was a ton of seats on that ride where I pulled that restraint down and the buckle was like 2 inches away from making. This was a complaint from guests. It was a complaint from maintenance. It was a complaint from everybody. But we contacted Intamin and said, hey, I need to know inside the seat. Huss is really good at this. They draw the seat like this, and then they draw the restraint coming over the top of it right down here. And then from where the restraint is at its maximum angle away, they give you a distance. They measure this distance right here. And they say that this distance is for the fattest guest. I know a lot of people just perked up, say, what? What? No, yeah. The ride print for the restraints, the actual printed thing that's in the manual and everything else, it actually calls out that dimension right there. There's two dimensions. There's a minimum, that's a stop, and there's a maximum. And the maximum actually has a note. It says, for fattest guest. I always thought that was funny. That's one of those things. A lot of, technical German doesn't translate well. Well, that's all it was. It was just a translation. It was just saying, look, more PC about it. It's like, look, the largest guest. This is the dimension for the largest guest. But technical translation, ride manual, it got dropped and it was just the fattest guest. So I contacted Intamin a number of times and said, hey, give me the dimension from the back of the seat to the inside of the restraint, because the seatbelt buckle was mounted on a rail with all sorts of different bolt holes. And what I'm thinking is like, I'm sure between Intamin and our engineering, we can get that dimension figured out. And then I can go through the ride and I can go say, okay, like let's set each seat to that dimension. We can even build up a fixture to set in the seat to make sure that when we push the seat down and it goes closed, that buckle just barely latches. And then all the dimensions are now uniform throughout the entire train. Yay, we all like stuff like that. Well, Intamin didn't have it. They're like, we don't know what it is. They didn't say we don't know. They'll never say that. But basically, we don't know. So they pointed at the restraint, and they're like, are those the original restraints that came with the ride? And we're, yeah, they are. And they said, well, did you ever have them repadded? It's like, well, yeah, we sent them to Ralph Alberts to be repadded every once in a while. And then Intamin tried pushing it off on Ralph Alberts. They're like, well, did they put the right size in this? Did they do this? Did they do that? And it's just like, shut up. What is your problem? And then the same thing. They did the same thing with the seats. We got past the restraints and they said, these seats, where'd you get those? It's like, well, we buy those from Ralph Alberts. And they're like, well, you didn't buy those from Intamin. Those aren't Intamin seats. Well, you're buying those from somewhere else. That's not our problem. That's your problem right there. You're using like some random company seats in our ride. Yeah. Odd statement to make, but we went to Ralph Alberts. We're like, hey, these seats that we buy from you, like, are these just homegrown seats? Like, what are they? And they said, no, that's Intamin's design right there. That's the same reason I called up. I actually contacted Ralph Alberts and said, hey, for doing this exact thing that all of you are asking about all the time, where I made a roller coaster chair an office seat, can we pour one with the same stuff, not the same standards, but I mean a softer foam and make it a little more cushiony to sit on and actually make a desk chair out of it? And Ralph Alberts came back and said, we don't own the rights to that, so we cannot sell you anything like that. Same thing, by the way, if you ever want to purchase a roller coaster wheel. The people that refabricate or recover the roller coaster wheels, they can also build them brand new, but that's not actually their wheel. That's the manufacturer's design that they have been cleared to use, but they haven't been cleared to sell it to anybody other than if you have that ride. So that's one of those things, but it's like, nope, that's Intamin's design, that's Intamin's stuff. So I'm just personally boiling that one down to, yeah, Intamin doesn't know that restraint dimension on the inside. Wow, I am way off track on this story, but that's one of the reasons you're all here, right? So we went out to that ride after on. I got on, and we managed. It took 2 operators, which I trust me. If you're an operator and you come across a big guy like me and you get another person, or you're able to do it yourself and you're able to give that big shove down on the restraint to get that seatbelt buckle closed, my hat is truly off to you. I appreciate that. And if anyone else out there bigger is on that edge like me, we all appreciate that extra. Let's try to get this person shoehorned into this ride, because there's been so many things I wouldn't have been able to ride because operators are, if they didn't try. But the operators a lot of times will try and shove that restraint down on me. But so we're sitting there. They got the restraint closed. I'm sitting next to my wife. And they were getting ready. And they go, I hear something click out of sequence. It did sound odd. It was like, click, click. And I was like, huh, that's odd. And my wife looks over at me and she goes, well, they have to recheck our restraints now. And then the ride launched. So we're going through the cycle. It's just normal cycle, right? It's like, oh, we come back, we're having fun, and we get off, and my wife was like, oh, that scared the crap out of me. I was like, what are you talking about? And she says, didn't you feel the restraints unlock right before we launched? And I was like, trust me, a guy my size, you don't really feel when those things unlock. You're just kind of like, I'm in there, see that? So I was like, what are you talking about? And the other people I with too, they're like, yeah, right before the ride dispatched, they unlocked the restraints. And I paused and thought about it, and I'm like, that's what the click was. They accidentally hit restraint unlock, which caused the little unlock assemblies to drop down and energize the restraints real quick. And then because they were hitting dispatch on the back end, as soon as they took their finger off the button, the restraints had unlocked basically, but as soon as they took their finger off the button, it went into dispatch. So because the other operator was pressing the dispatch button the entire time, because they weren't trying to let people off, it was just a, whoops, I pushed the wrong button. So the operator went, whoops, I pushed the wrong button. But instead of saying, well, hold on, we got to go recheck the restraints again because I accidentally pressed unlock restraints, they just went, whoops, and then pushed both dispatch buttons and sent the train. And I got it from everyone that was with me. I was like, yep, that's what happened. I was like, well, crap. So I had to pull out my cell phone and I scrolled through my contacts and I got the manager from operations. The only reason I went to the manager, honestly, because I didn't have the supervisor's phone number in my phone, but I went to the manager. This guy's really cool, super nice guy. Be kind of stuck up from time to time, but honestly, we all can. That's in a managerial position. That's what you have to do. You have to be able to roll with the punches and deliver some hard punches at the same time. So it's just I don't hold anybody against that. But I explained to him what happened, and he's like, wait a minute, let me come down there, because he wanted to be in person and talk with me about it. And so he came down there, and we were standing off in the background area, nowhere near the ride or anything, and he actually got some of my family members, and they're like, yeah, we explained what was going on, and it was just like, oh, crap. So he made the call. Well, he made the call over the radio, I believe it was, and he contacted our control center, which we call base, and had them contact the ride, and he told them to stop operation of the ride. So he did, and I believe when the next cycle was finished, they said, sorry, we're experiencing technical difficulty. Of course, they didn't know why. They were just like, I don't know. And then it was the same type of thing. We left at that time. He's like, I'm going to take care of it. And then he left at that point in time, and I asked what happened the next day, and they said, yeah, it went down for like 15, 20 minutes, and then it went back up and running. And I checked with some other people, and they said, yep, they rotated the crew out of there, and I don't know what happened to those guys. I honestly don't remember who was operating to say if they... Because sometimes when you mess up, it's just a matter of like you lose all your certification for the ride, and you have to be retrained. It's like, okay, so... But I honestly don't remember, but that was kind of an odd, weird thing to happen, and especially to be present for that. But yeah, so they hit unlock, came down, unlocked the restraints, and then as soon as the dispatch signal went through, it lifted those contacts back up into the track, and then the moment those broke contact with the actuators, which are electric, they automatically, they're hydraulic restraints, so the valves close right back and you have both cylinders holding you again. So there would have been not really any danger unless during that split second of time, because what you felt was the pressure come up, not necessarily the restraint come up. But it would have been a problem if during that split second time someone much smaller with the seatbelt with plenty of room was able to lift the restraint up in that little bit of time, and then the train launched. Of course, honestly, with that ride, probably as soon as that train launched, they would have naturally, instinctively, the restraint would have just come back down on top of the person. Kind of like self-closing at that point. But that was a really interesting one. At this point in the video, if you haven't already, please make sure you like and subscribe and give me some comments down there. Let me know if you got any fun stories to add on to these. And then let me know if you want to see something for topics in the future, too. I'm always up for new stuff. I've got a list of things that I'm making, but sometimes somebody says something and I'm like, oh yeah, let's do that one real quick. That really sounds like fun. I do enjoy getting that information. You guys come up with a lot of good ideas for videos, so let me know if you got them. You can also email me at ryantheriotmechanic@yahoo.com. Let's get back into the video. Operators do have to deal with guests in a much more intimate fashion than maintenance does, because maintenance shows up to the ride. By the time we're there, they're typically not people around. Sometimes we'll ask them to clear the ride area because we got to do stuff and we don't need people around while we're hammering on something or taking something apart for people to take pictures. If there's some guy in the queue line that's trying to make YouTube videos off of maintenance people working, I don't know who that would be. Anyways, but they do have to deal with people. I remember I heard a call come over the radio one time from our operational base, and they called the manager. That was that guy I was talking about earlier. He was a really cool guy. And they called the manager up, and they're like, can you come to this area for a guest complaint? And he was like, I'm really busy right now. He was with me for some reason. I think we're at a down ride somewhere. He's like, I'm really busy right now. I can't exactly make it. He says, can you tell me what's going on? And they go, yeah, go to another channel on the radio. So he goes to the other channel. Of course, everyone in the park flips to that other channel. It's like, a guest complaint? Yeah, we want to hear this. Come on, what's going on there? Honestly, because I was standing with him, so I didn't have to flip channels because he was right there. I don't remember what the exact complaint was, but it was a rant, essentially. The person was like, I'm not going to come here. I'm not going to come back. This is the worst place I've ever been. Blah, 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 blah. Told him all this stuff. And at the end of all that, they were like, just, I'm out of here. And then they left. At the end of all that, the operational manager just keyed up and came back and said, like, did you tell them to enjoy their adventure? So where I was working at the time, that was the phrase that a lot of people used for the end when they would, as someone was going off, instead of like a goodbye, they would say, as part of the theming for the park, they would say, enjoy your adventure. So after this person just told off the people and wants to storm out of or is storming out of the park, the operations manager, just very cool, calm, and collective, sitting there just going, did you tell them to enjoy their adventure? And I was like, that is awesome. That was like a verbal middle finger louder than anything that could ever be said. That was so hilarious. Oh my gosh. So yeah, operations gets to deal with some people in some fun ways sometimes. I think I'm too much of an a-hole to deal with people directly like that. In fact, I have proof of that, actually. For a while there at the park, we had a area by HIT that owns the Thomas the Train rights. So if you know Thomas the Train, it's an older like stop motion animation show. Talking trains, that sort of stuff. Very popular with kids. We opened up a Thomas the Train like land. I had 3 rides in it. I think 4 attractions, 3 rides. And kids loved it, man. When it was Thomas the Train, oh man, that place was like wall-to-wall kids. Parents were there. Everyone was spending money on souvenirs, Thomas the Train souvenirs and stuff like that. But the problem was the main attraction was Thomas the Train. That was the main attraction. We had this, it was a full-size train that you could ride on, kind of full-size train. But the engine, the locomotive, was a diesel generator engine. So it was like a 4-cylinder generator that was powering a hydraulic pump. And then all the motors underneath the engine, or the tug, all the motors were also hydraulic drive. So you had a gas engine turning a hydraulic motor or hydraulic pump, which turns hydraulic motors, and you get all your motion out of that. Well, it would break down every once in a while. And the way you get at that power package is at the very front of the train, where the Thomas the Tank Engine face is. That's the smiling face, and the eyes are moving and stuff like that. There's a small lever underneath. You pull the lever down, move it to the side, and then the entire face pulls out and then rotates off. So you pull the thing out and rotate it off. We did that a couple times where Thomas was broken down, and the operators have to be careful because these kids, this is like a living thing to these kids. So they're just like, oh, what's the matter with Thomas? What's wrong with him? And then we're over there doing this face off with it. We're like, and the kids on several occasions were like, ah, they started screaming. We were like, oh my gosh. Talk about traumatic, because where we were, like where it was stopped or whatever, is like in full view of everybody. And we had to roll Thomas the Tank Engine's face off in order to work on him. So the last year it was there, we didn't know, but they pulled the contract and we had to change all the theming. So it was not Thomas the Tank Engine anymore. But the last year it was there, that was when I said, oh, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy a Easy Up tent. You set them up, they're like big, like movable tents that come in a rectangular package, and you can set them up, and they have sides on them. I'm going to buy a white one. Yeah, white maintenance grease. Yeah, this should work great having a white one. But I never got to it. But I was going to buy a white one and put the red hospital cross on it. So when we had to do that in the future, I could set that up over Thomas the Tank Engine with the red cross on it, and then put the sidewalls up. That way maintenance could work in peace and not have to be pestered by the guests, which were constantly asking, hey, mister, is this ride open yet? It's the common thing. And we didn't have to be worried about like when we have to take off Thomas's face about how traumatized little kids are going to be in the future. Oh my gosh. Those were some screams when we had to take his face off of there, though. Ooh. Let's see. One time I was up in our work bay of our Flores coaster, and right behind that work bay is our parking lot for all the employees. Well, most of the employees anyway. It wasn't that big of a parking lot. And I'm standing up there, kind of just shooting the breeze with another mechanic, because we're working on a train that's in refurbishment and the ride's in operation out there. And I look down and I see this car right behind, and it's got a parking tag on it that says it's an employee car. It's supposed to be there, so it's a car, one of ours, or Parks anyway. And on the dashboard, full view, not like hidden off to the side like something had slipped off of it, nothing like that, just middle of the dashboard, right in the center, there is just a giant bong sitting there. Just somebody smoking bong was just sitting it was like 3 feet long, just sitting top dead center of the dashboard. And I was like, oh, I don't know what's going on there, but I had to call LP over, Loss Prevention's over, security, and show them. I'm like, hey, I don't know what this is, but you might want to contact this individual and find out what it is. It's a real simple thing. I mean, amusement parks, they're like their own little city, so it's no big deal. If you go there and you're like, hey, what's this bong doing on your car? And it's like, oh, I smoked tobacco out of that thing. And it's like, that's fine. Hey, let's go to first aid real quick and get you a drug test. And then if the person's being truthful about it, it's just like no big deal. You go out, you drug test, it's like no problem, and you go back to work. Then it's just like, hey, try not to leave that on your dashboard in the future, because that raises some eyebrows. But even like where I was in California, it's like, well, you can smoke marijuana for medicinal purposes. Or that was a while back, they would start just for medicinal purposes. Or now you could smoke it legally. Well, that's all well and good, but most companies still have a policy that governs that and says that you cannot be under the influence of drugs or alcohol while you're working at the park, or even while you're employed at the company. So it might be legal in the state, but it might not be okay with the company, in which case, if you're found doing that, you'd still get fired doing it. I don't know what happened with that, and honestly, it wasn't my business. I just needed to report that. Same ride, different occasion. I went out there I was taking a contractor out there, and we have to pass through this area underneath the station and then out through this back area, which is it's like got 6-foot fence around it. It's got restricted area on it. So it's like, okay, so I come up to the fence and I unlock the fence, and it's me and I think a contractor and another employee. And I go into the fence and I lock it back and I put the keys back on my hip. I got my keys on my radio and everything. And then we're going up. We go up to the work bay where the trains are. Ride's running. And then after a couple seconds, I'm like, it got quiet. And I'm like, why did it get quiet? What's going on? I look over and there's a train stopped on that ride just next to the work bay right there. There's a train stopped right there. And I look over and I'm like, they stopped the ride, or the ride faulted or something. And then they called the ride out over the radio as a guest in infield. And I'm like, someone got in the infield? Wow, that's some weird timing. That's crazy. And then I'm like, well, I got my keys and stuff. I guess I can go fire it back up. I told the other guys, I'm like, hey, wait here. I got to go find out what's going on over there. So I'm walking down. I'm walking towards the control room to go through the control room. And I get this operator up on top. She goes, excuse me. Yeah? And she goes, you can't be there. What? She says, you can't be there. That's the infield to the ride. And I'm like, keys, radio, badge. I'm like, I'm maintenance. I can be here. This area is not the infield to the ride. That area over there, that's the infield to the ride. This is simply just a maintenance area back here. No, you can't be. So I had to get the supervisors out there. They were all laughing. They're like, oh, man, let us know the next time you're going to go to a ride. I'm like, yeah, I guess the next time I have to work on something, I should let you know before I go work on the ride for some reason. But whatever, it was a learning experience. But it was just like they shut the ride down because they saw some people unlock the fence and then walk into the train house. But all right, I guess I can't fault them for that. They were just being cautious, but it was still odd for me. When it comes to ride operators and doing stuff like that, it's not really a story, but it's like we had one guy working on that floorless coaster, and he was asked operators in the morning time to send him around. And they sent him around, and halfway through the ride stopped, and he was hung up in the block brakes. So now it was morning time, the park was opening, and now they had to get a hold of maintenance, which was not at the ride, which caused confusion because I'm like, the guy's out there. What are you talking about? Just to find out, like, oh, he's on the train that's in the block brake. I'm like, oh, and I go up there and I'm like, what happened? And they're like, ride stop. And I'm like, why did the ride stop? They're like, we were just kind of messing with him. And I'm like, that is a whole other problem. We don't hit ride stop at any point in time unless there is a legitimate problem. I'm like, you don't do stuff like this. I call the supervisor up and I'm like, you need to come up here and help me deal with this situation. And he comes up there. He's like, what's the situation? I'm like, they hit ride stop and hung my mechanic up there in the block brake. They're like, oh, yeah, you can't do that. That's not okay. And he started going off on them. I said, okay, but you got to help me resolve this situation now. And he says, what's the situation? I said, when I bring him back in, because I have to get the ride into a manual mode now and get him down. When I bring him back in, he is going to be hot under the collar, and I literally need someone here to help me make sure that he does not clobber this person. So actually, as a precaution, we brought security up because they were very close. We asked them to come up. They came up. And when he got off, find out how hot a mechanic will get if you hang them up in the block brake on purpose. Like, he was so pissed off, and rightfully so. I would have been just as pissed off. But I was able to talk him down. I was able to say, go downstairs, go to the control room, pack up your stuff, go back to the shop. I will finish running the ride up because he told me exactly where he was with it. It's like, I'll finish running the ride. I'll finish the checks. Go down there. But man, I thought that was going to be a fist fight for a minute. I was like, holy crap. That's bad. I went to a ride call on our Rapids ride, and I was out there doing something, and I was wearing my normal mechanic shirt, and I had my phone sitting in my upper pocket up here. And I think it was a turntable fault. There was a photo eye on the side that just made sure as the big round turntable was going that nothing was in the way, so it didn't like hurt somebody. So I went over to clear the photo eye, and as I cleared the photo eye, I bent over, and that phone went straight out of my pocket right in the 3-inch gap between the rotating platform and the concrete and went bloop right in the water. I was so upset. I had just got that phone like a week before then. I was like, oh, I was so pissed off. It was at the end of the day too, so the ride was already pretty much closing. And they had run the rest of the queue line away because they're just like the ride had faulted, and they just told the people leave. So I'm like, okay, I checked the thing. I went over, I'm like, hit the reset, start it, and then we started the ride back up. And as it started going, because we weren't loading people anymore because we said the ride was closed for the evening. But I talked with the operator, and I'm like, how many people do we have left on this ride? And he was looking down there, counting the rafts, and he said, okay, that raft right there, whatever number it was, he's like, once that one's empty, nobody else on the ride. It's like, okay, so I let them come up. They were unloading, and I verified. I went back to the operator who sits in the crow's nest up there, who could see pretty much 3/4 of the ride from where they sit. And I'm like, can you verify again with me that there's no more people on the ride? And he's like, yep, once that boat unloads, no more people on the ride. I'm like, okay. So that boat came in, they rotated it and stopped it, and I went ahead and say, can you hit station stop? And they hit station stop, and they went ahead and unloaded that boat, and those people walked off. And then I'm like, no one else on the ride? And everyone says, no one else on the ride. I was like, all right. I reach over, grab the key, turn it off. All the water starts draining down. I waited, and when the water was just down to about, 5 inches left of water in the station up there, which is pretty much just nothing. It's just residual water just trying to make its way out of the station. I went over, I jumped off the side real quick because, it's only about a 3.5 foot drop down there. So I jumped off the side real quick. I went down there, and there was the phone sitting there. I took it out. I opened it up. It was still on, so I powered it off. And I went over, and I kind of shook it out really good. I went over to our impulse coaster on the other side of the park, and we had these big bags of desiccant. That's the stuff that comes in like new shoes, to keep moisture out of stuff. So what I did is I went back and I put like 3 packs of desiccant in a plastic bag, and then put the plastic bag on top of a transformer to warm it. And then I just let it sit for the rest of the night. And then I took that home, and then the next morning, moment of truth, I turned it on, powered on just fine, had no other problems with it. I was like, wow, saved it. That was pretty incredible. It's like, I couldn't believe that. I was under about 3 feet of water for about 4.5, 5 minutes straight. Easy, 5 minutes straight. It's like another time I had a phone. I was climbing on top of our Skyflyer, and I wasn't that high up, but I had a OtterBox case. It was on my hip. I had an OtterBox case that was on my climbing harness, and it was attached to my belt on my waist. And as I was climbing over something, the harness caught it, and it actually unlatched the phone, and the phone fell. It fell 50 feet, hit a crossbar, and landed face down on the concrete. Now, I don't sell OtterBox cases, but after I was done swearing up a storm, I got down to the bottom. The screen wasn't cracked. There was nothing wrong with it whatsoever. I didn't even have to replace the OtterBox case. It was perfectly fine. So, personal experience. Hey, if you want a case, get an OtterBox case. I do not get any kickback. I do not sell them. Don't ask. It's not my thing. Just some personal experience I have. When I talk about phones, I can't help but think of, I had one guy who unfortunately got fired because he was working a roller coaster, and a guest said they lost their phone, and they said, this is where it is, this is where it was, blah, blah, blah. And at nighttime, they couldn't find it. They couldn't find the phone. And the guest was standing there like, I have a GPS signal on the phone. It's right over there somewhere. And they kept looking for it, and they said, we can't find it. We don't know where it is. So the next morning, we tell the mechanic, it's somewhere between here and here. The guest swears it's right there. And the mechanic comes back and is like, I found a couple carcasses of phones that have been shattered beyond recognition. Been through the road wheels once or twice. But he said, I can't find that phone. It's like, okay, so we contact that person, and that person said, this is, they have other parts of the park that do this stuff. It's not maintenance. We just report what we find. And that they called that person up and they said, oh, we can't find it. And that person says, the GPS is still on and the GPS has moved now. The phone's moved. And we're like, oh, where's the phone now? They're like, it's not at the park anymore. It's at a residential address. Oh. What's the address where it's at? And they gave them, because you, just like a normal map, you could see like that's where it is, a sort of approximate address. But they're like, this address roughly on this street in this city. And LP kind of, I'm sure, I wasn't there for it, I'm sure they cringed and they typed in that information and searched the employee files, and it came back with a maintenance guy that lived at that address. And they contacted me and they said, hey, is this person working here? It's like, yeah, that person works here. And were this person working during these times? It's like, let me check the schedule. It's like, yep, they were working during those times. Well, they brought that person in, and the person brought the phone back, gave the phone back. I'm not sure if the guest pressed charges or not, because that's basically theft at that point in time. But that mechanic, gone, fired. Do not rehire status for sure. Let's see. Around the backside of the park, we used to have a CP Huntington diesel train that ran up and down the backside of the park. We were walking along there one day, and it was just maintenance guys while that was running. But the two maintenance guys were screwing around with each other. Basically, they were giving each other false information over the radio. Just kind of like playful banter, nothing really incriminating. But one of the things they did was they said the name of that ride, and they said, they had just gotten done taking a ride call out there because the crossing arms had gone down with no train. So they were joking that it was a ghost train. That ride can't really get ghost trains, but they were joking it was a ghost train on there. And then we also had a lot of problems with those trains derailing all the time because they would go over track switches, and those little kiddie type trains, those smaller trains, they don't like track switches that much, especially on inclines and stuff like that. So they had joked that we had derailed a ghost train. And they said that over the radio, jokingly. They were like, yeah, we derailed a ghost train. This was on a Talk About channel. It wasn't the one that was broadcasting. It was one separate. Other people were eavesdropping on that Talk About channel, and they legitimately thought that we had a derailed train. So operations from all over went back to that area of the park to try to clear this derailed train when nothing was there. They were quite upset. I was like, yeah, okay, great. Wow, this is going on longer than I thought it was going to be. I'm Ryan the Ride Mechanic. If you haven't already, make sure you like and subscribe. If you want to hear more stories like these, let me know. I'll be happy to try to jot down some more memories as I can jog my memory and get them to come out. Because, man, that's rough these days. I'm Ryan the Ride Mechanic, and remember, stay off the air gates. Bye.